Hello, Dark Reader, and welcome to the Dark Side of the Library podcast. I'm your host, Katie, and today we are going to be talking about Earthlings. This is by Sayaka Murata. Don't be fooled by this really cute cover here with the adorable hedgehog plushie. This novel is very disturbing, deeply disturbing, in fact. It probably will not leave my brain. It'll live rent-free there for probably ever. So I would say, before we begin today, I'm just going to say I actually enjoyed this novel. If I could even say enjoy, it feels kind of wrong to say that, to be honest, because it's very grotesque. There's a lot of horrible stuff in here. So I gave this book about a 4 out of 5 stars. I would say this is really similar vibe-wise to Labvona. It's just really disturbing. Before we even go further, I want to tell you there's a lot of trigger warnings here, and I want to just make sure you're aware. So here we have, in this book, there's incest, sexual assault, there's pedophilia, graphic violence, there's even child abuse, which is both physical and emotional child abuse. And then to top it all off, cannibalism. So just so you're aware, if this is not the book for you, I might even skip this podcast episode, and we will see you next time, of course, and make sure to tune in every Wednesday and Friday. If you are interested in any of these books, by the way, make sure to check out our show notes. They do have some affiliate links, but they keep the podcast going. All right, let me tell you more about Earthlings. It's a lot to unpack here, so let me try to summarize it. We'll talk more about Sayaka Murata and then my thoughts on the book. Earthlings is technically a coming-of-age story. I mean, if you wanted to simplify it as much as so. We have Natsuki, who's our main protagonist, and her boyfriend cousin named Yu, who's kind of more in the background, but both of them feel very alienated from their families. They internalize a lot of these beliefs, and they think that they are from another planet called, and I have to give our narrator Nancy Wu a lot of accolades because she nails this planet name every time she talks. It's Poppin' Popopia, I think. I'm sure I said that wrong, but anyway, that is the planet name. So Natsuki does not fit into her family at all. Her parents favor her sister partially because she's suffered from an ailment for a lot of her life, and that's just the person that they gave a lot of attention to. She's a little bit of a troubled child. So she confides and becomes best friends with her hedgehog plush named Piyut. Piyut claims that he is from the planet Poppin' Popopia, and he has a message for Natsuki saying that she is supposed to help save Earth. Each summer, Natsuki goes and visits her grandparents deep in the forest in a wooden house, which is very different from the place that she typically stays at in the city. And she hangs out with her cousin, Yu, who's her favorite person ever. It's her safety person. So Yu actually tells Natsuki one day that he's an alien, so that he's extraterrestrial, and that every night he searches the nighttime sky for a spaceship that's supposed to take him back to his home planet. And Natsuki is like, hey, me too! So they both kind of lean into that with each other. But when they go back home, and Natsuki is not with Yu anymore, not in the safety of her grandparents' home and visiting for summertime, everyday life, she's abused, scolded, and she's even preyed upon by a young teacher in her cram school. She grows up in this hostile environment, a violent world, and she consoles herself and says she just has to survive. These are important messages because that's an agreement that her cousin Yu and her made every single summer. It's just they just need to get through it. Adults rule us, they tell us what we're supposed to do, and we just need to survive, is what they say. In addition to Yu kind of propelling her forward through life and kind of dealing with some of these hardships, she feels like she has this potent inner power, including like actual powers with like a wand and a ring and all kinds of cool stuff. So Natsuki seems forced to fit into a society that she's deemed the baby factory. But even as a married woman, later in life, she wonders if there's more to this world than the mundane reality that everyone else seems to accept, and that the answers are out there, and Natsuki has the power to find them. This is a dark, very disturbing, but also sometimes endearing and interesting and wonderful novel. It begs the question, what does it mean to be happening in this world where every single one of us are supposed to conform to these things? This is all we're supposed to do. But clearly there are a lot more themes here that we will hopefully unbox. So before I talk more about my thoughts, this kind of rolls into it. We're going to talk about Sayaka Murata herself. So like I said, she's an up-and-coming Japanese author. She's won a few awards for some of her stories, but the one that she's really well known for, especially when you kind of put it side by side to Earthlings, is Convenience Store Woman. In fact, if maybe this is a little too surreal, or maybe it's just too in your face, there's too many trigger warnings, Convenience Store Woman does talk a lot about very similar themes, if not almost all of the themes here, and maybe expands more like being the cog in the wheel sort of deal. But same sort of thing, but they both kind of slap you in the face. This one, Earthlings, is like a big slap. One of the biggest themes that Sayaka Murata talks about in her books is conformity. And conformity is really important in Japanese culture, but not just that. It's important in a lot of places. Like, we are told to conform all the time. And that is within the context of multiple cultures. Not just we talk about American culture, but we can talk about our own family lives. We all are living in different bubbles of culture, and we all are technically supposed to conform. And that is all over the place. Right? So she does talk a lot about conformity in both Convenience Store Woman and Earthlings, what that looks like. Another thing she really enjoys doing, and I appreciate it, is she challenges a lot of taboos. Earthlings especially, I mean, with all the trigger warnings. But I guess an example here is she does talk about like incest. So with you and Natsuki, they have, I have to say, like, it is kind of a sweet relationship because they both care about each other, and they both, for the most part, respect each other. And our author, Sayaka Murata, talks about incest, but she's also talks about, like, I understand that I have been taught incest is bad, but why? She even asked the author, asked about, like, why is cannibalism wrong? And I think a lot of us would be like, hello, but, you know, some places that might not be the case. Sometimes in history that might not be the case, or instances. And another thing that our author, Sayaka Murata, talks about is asexuality, which I think is really important, and I really enjoy, kind of, at least in Earthlings, this example of that, because we have not only Natsuki and Yu in the book, but Natsuki gets married in the book to somebody who is asexual. And Natsuki, I would say, arguably is also asexual over the course of her life. So I appreciate Sayaka Murata's novels and the themes and the things she has to say. And the questions she poses, I think they're very, very important. And I think with Earthlings in particular, maybe she felt like Convenience Store didn't hit it home. Earthlings should have. It makes you feel very uncomfortable. And I think sometimes that is very important because we can't always look away when things make us queasy or feel just horrible. Sometimes we have to actually face these issues. So some of my thoughts on this book. First of all, again, I did rate this about a 4 out of 5. There's a lot to unbox here, so I'm going to just talk about the things that really hit home for me, the reasons why I enjoyed this book. That's a hard word to say for that. We are going to talk about some of those trigger warnings, and there might be some spoilers, so just be aware of that if you want to read this book before I spoil anything. Check out Earthlings. It's a pretty great novel in my opinion, and let me know what you think. Comment and subscribe here on YouTube, or listen on your favorite listening app, and check out our other socials. If you like dark books, come follow us too. So the first thing I want to talk about is the sexual assault aspect. So I don't want to generalize or talk necessarily about in depth my personal experiences here. I hope that's understandable. But it's not just the event. And sometimes that the feelings of the event itself for an essay it doesn't necessarily happen right away. Sometimes it could be years to manifest. But some of the important aspects that I think all of us can take is the compounding exterior stuff that makes it enormously more difficult to deal with. We will take the character Natsuki's experience as an example here. So Natsuki has been groomed by her cram school teacher, who's young, he's handsome, he's kind, people like him. Natsuki actually, during one weird event, she tells her mom, "My teacher is weird." So that's something that I really resonated with. You aren't trying to defame the person that's making you uncomfortable. She is such a people pleaser that she is like, I'm trying to protect myself and trying to say something and use my voice and also talk to somebody who is also an abuser to me, so Natsuki's mom. She's trying to voice what's happening, but in addition to that, she's like, I'm not going to straight out say, hey, my teacher's a horrible creep. She's like, hey, he's weird and he's doing this thing and I don't get it. It is very confusing. And for Natsuki, that could have been the case. So instead of her mom validating her, her mom does the opposite. And not only that, she makes it even worse by blaming Natsuki for these weird circumstances that are happening between her and her teacher. And over the course of Natsuki's life, there's been instances of that compounding that I was talking about. So, for example, she confides in a friend, and one of them says, oh, don't you feel blessed because he's so cute? And then she lies to another one and is like, oh, he's ugly and gross. And the friend's like, oh man, that's horrible. But then that person puts a timestamp on it because she's supposed to be a part of the baby factory. And isn't it about time to get over this instance? You should be dating because we're all supposed to be having babies right now. Or even worse is like, hey, it wasn't even that bad. Other people have had it worse than you have. What's the big deal? So there's a lot of things in Natsuki's life that just compounds and compounds. I think this is a really important thing to note that our author has presented to us, because a lot of these things make us uncomfortable and we're not aware of the words that we use when we respond to a situation like that, when somebody is confiding in us and they want to be validated or they want to be heard, and yet there's so many other things that we're considering and factoring into it and putting our own judgments on others. I think that Sayaka Murata did a fantastic job illustrating some of those hardships that somebody who has dealt with essay do go through. Natsuki in particular, because she's always felt alienated, she gets even further into that dissociation and needs to be, and feels even more validated because she's clearly Poppin'. She's clearly not fitting into the little in-group that everybody is trying to push her into. So she's further and further justifying some of the things that she's thinking and experiencing. So that is the kind of the introduction of the book too, is Natsuki feeling like an alien. You know, Natsuki really didn't want to burden her family. She felt that, you know, mom has a lot going on just with mom, and mom's dealing with sister, and sister's also got, you know, a lot of things. Let's try not to make this a problem. And then dad is very, like, kind of out of the picture except for a few times. So the three of them are just this pod, and then Natsuki is already feeling like an outsider. And the only security that Natsuki felt that she had, the only thing that she felt was really truly hers, was her relationship with her cousin Yu. So Natsuki even loses a lot of her bodily autonomy. She cannot eat. So after this event with her teacher, she feels like she can't even taste food. Her mouth is done. And then even her ear, same thing, like she can't even hear out of her ear. She wants to find a place of safety with her cousin, summertime cousin, survive. That's all that matters. She wants to preserve what she's got. Things are already starting to dismantle with her body. She feels like because the society, this is what's normal for the society, and this is what's to be expected from the society. She's getting that at such a young age that she wants to just for once make one choice for herself, which is to be with her cousin before everything else is tarnished. And there is a couple quotes in the book that really just drive this idea in, is that over time we have these voices, these exterior voices, like from our parents to our teachers to society. Everything is driving us to do the X, Y, and Z because we are supposed to do these things. So this is what's bringing me to the next thing that I found interesting in this book that is really important, which is conformity. So that was another thing about this book that really hit me and resonated with me. So I noticed a lot of reviewers would talk about how a lot of these issues are exclusively like from Japan. And I would argue that's not the case. So in particular for this novel, Natsuki is not obsessed, but like she's trying not to be a part of the factory, which is basically selling her body for just, it's something she is clearly getting a lot of messages about on the outside because she finds her current husband in her adult life. So she's in her mid-30s at this time. They find each other through this website, which is basically like a marriage of convenience. They're trying to get both of their parents off their backs. Like, they both don't want to have kids. They don't want to have babies. They don't really want to have a sexual or romantic relationship. And they're just they're tired of people just hounding them for not conforming. So this concept, I think, doesn't just mean or talk about like for people who might not want to be married or want to be in a romantic relationship, but even people that don't want to necessarily have kids or people that don't fall into traditional norms of what like our lives are supposed to be like. That includes a lot of people have babies before they get married. I know that me personally, I don't want children, and I have been definitely like over the course of many, many years. I think by now, because I'm just very firm, like I'm not having kids. For a long time, it was an uphill battle of I don't want kids. Oh, you'll change your mind. Well, you're supposed to. I even had a relative of mine when I told them when I was 10. I was like, I never want my own children. I might consider adoption. You need to have your own children, which was mind-blowing to me. And why does it matter? So those messages still everywhere. Those things are still around. So I see a lot of reviewers who are like, oh man, that's just not really how it is, or this is a little extreme. I don't think so. And you don't need to take Sayaka Murata's Earthlings to a T. And those pressures apply to culture today. And they have ill effects. Even for people who want to have children, the pressures of why don't you have babies yet? It might be a private affair. Maybe somebody cannot have children. Maybe this is very sensitive. That's nobody's business. But we all seem to feel like we have a say in how other people are supposed to live their lives and what is supposed to happen. That's what's cool about Sayaka Murata and her exploration of why should we do that? What is it that, like, what makes us should have to do this? What is that? Which is why the end of the novel is so surreal and so crazy and very disturbing. Now we're going to transition from our conformity into our taboos here. And this is where I'm going to go into a few spoilers. I don't want to ruin the whole book, but there's things I will imply, and I would love to hear your interpretation of how this all just evolves, because I had to reread the end twice, because I was like, what am I supposed to make of this? So a whole host of things happens in between this period of time, but Natsuki, her husband, and cousin Yu all want to basically kind of run away and live their alien life, their Poppin' Popapia alien lifestyle here on Earth. So they go and escape at their grandparents' old summer home that nobody lives in. So they start justifying certain actions, and this is where we start touching on like what is and what isn't taboo and why. So things start innocently enough, like they don't want to use a watch to tell the time because they're just going to allow their bodies to do that. They just have dark time, light time. We have things like, we're not going to wear clothes because screw that. Or like, instead of having beds and they're all made, we just have piles of blankets and we all like to wrap up everywhere and, just kind of have a pile of blankets everywhere. And then it starts to push the boundaries a little further, like theft. So they have a Poppin' way of doing things or rationalizing why this makes sense and how the human way doesn't actually make sense, which is an interesting dichotomy because some of the human stuff seems really barbaric, but when, as an audience member, you look at some of what they do, we might say that that's barbaric in a lot of ways. So I love that they keep pushing the boundaries as we continue forward when they go and live out in the cabin. But then we devolve even further. One of the interesting things in this book was that they were saying how silly it is that, Earthlings are so willing to take lives. Like, they're so willing to, produce babies, but also so willing to take life away. And, just, it's not necessarily about producing babies. Like, they just don't care. Like, the life that's there, it's fine that it's dying or something. So the value of life arguably isn't quite there. And that's something that in the Poppin' Popapia planet, it doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. And then, so they're like, well, cannibalism. Why waste this body that's here, let it wither away? When we're hungry, we need food. And it's a resource there. Like, why wouldn't we use the resources that are here? These are complicated things that are discussed in this book. And honestly, some of the more bizarre and very extreme things are towards the end. And I think that Sayaka Murata just piles it on you and you're just like, what is happening? So it's hard to sort of sift through a lot that's happening. It's one that you have to sit with for a while and your brain finally just catches up with some of those internal feelings that you get. There's just so much that I feel like keeps coming to my attention. The more I sit with it, the more I talk about this. There's a lot of metaphors on Natsuki talks about silkworms and how they used to kind of hide and she could hear them chewing in the walls of this house during the summertime before they fly and become moths. And there's a lot of this interesting metaphor that starts to, again, it's just piled on towards the end. So Natsuki and Yu and her husband in this house, as they start to lean further into this alien dissociation and lean into, I guess, a little bit of a barbarism, and yet they are rationalizing all of this. But we have they're tucked in these white cocoons in their blankets. They're eating and feasting just like the silkworms would be while they're going through their metamorphosis. People find them and then they're away. Amongst all of this chaos that is happening in the end, and all of these ideas being passed around, a lot of the grotesqueness, I feel buries some parts of it. An important line in this book is that Natsuki gains her hearing back and she can taste again. And she says that she feels like she now has full ownership of her body once again, after running away and living the life as a Poppin' Popapian alien. And it's like she's escaped and is able to fully be herself. And that's hard to get amongst all, because the scene that she says that in, you're just so overwhelmed and kind of grossed out that it's hard to really understand what that means. And like, it took me a long time. That, again, I had to go over this twice because I was like, what is happening right now? So I guess my final thoughts are, because this is such a hard book to summarize, I guess the appealing part is this is really dark and disturbing. It's grotesque. There's a lot of the trigger warnings, but there's a lot to unbox. But there's a lot of stuff that I think is really important and really serious themes in here that I don't even know if Sayaka Murata even intended for all, at least I don't know if she intended me to feel all of those things or see all of those things. It's just a very interesting book. So yes, there's a lot, expect a lot, and expect to just sit there with it for a couple of days and feel it. And I would love to hear what you think about Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. If you've read Convenience Store Woman 2, I'd love to hear your take on that. I still have yet to read that one, but that one sounds like a really interesting one as far as like being a part of the workforce, which is another problem. So anyway, let me know what you think of Earthlings and Sayaka Murata's work here on YouTube or on your favorite listening app. If you do want to check out other dark books, we tend to publish every Wednesday and Friday. We like to curate all the dark, spooky books that are coming out every single month for kids, comics, YA, adult fiction, and nonfiction. And on Fridays, I try to do little minisodes of books I've read lately, so stay tuned for those too. Thank you so much for tuning in today and listening to my overview of this book and my feels. This one was hard to kind of talk about. I'm not even sure if I answered anybody's questions, but I appreciate you listening anyway. I hope I made sense, but thank you so much for tuning in. It means a whole lot to us, and we will see you in the next podcast episode. Have a creep-tastic rest of your week.